And who would you have me compare myself to? Donald Trump, Dick Cheney, George Bush II, the sports figures that are in vogue, the media figures that are in vogue? Never have, never will. But in many circles, I would not be criticized for that. But in comparing myself to Gandhi, King, Jesus, Alice Paul, Diane Wilson, I open myself to near certain ridicule from all quarters. So be it. Paul Farmer was the founder or co-founder of Partners in Health. Dr. Kim, previously at Dartmouth, was the other co-founder, now head of the World Bank, or soon to take over there. Paul Farmer is easily one of the most respected humanitarian doctors, health system creators in the world for his work with Haiti in the furthest, most accessible regions with drug-resistant tuberculosis all over the world. You know where he claims to have gotten the basis for his morality? Lord of the Rings trilogy. So laugh it up, ridicule if you like. ObiWan Kenobi fought and fought and fought, his body always in the way of the harm. And yet sometimes not. For a long time he retreated to a remote planet. It was neither his time to die nor his time to fight. And then he found his time to fight. And then he found his time to die. Jesus ran from his would-be killers on numerous occasions. Not to suggest he ran in fear, but strategically he assessed that his life would not best serve by being killed at that time. This must be my 8th time of understanding that I was called toward death, to death's door, and yet this time it was clear to me I was called through death's door. This death fast. Yet it seems that it is not yet my time. I'm not certain of that, but that's the way it's looking. The process of creating global warming's death fast and the companion book A Personal Trainer for the Insanely Humane Unviolent Warrior have changed things and changed me, and changed, most importantly, the field of battle with which I'm presented and on which I choose to fight. Particularly the personal trainer is a profoundly important work in its potential. Tolstoy's Gospel in Brief may be the most important book on the planet, Tolstoy being one of the most widely read authors in world history. And yet, who's heard of, let alone read, the Gospel in Brief? It could be, and maybe should be, the most important book on the planet. Tolstoy did his job. We haven't done ours. Who's read it? Who's heard of it? So I'm not suggesting that the personal trainer for the insanely humane, nonviolent warrior will be read. Seems unlikely. Maybe no one, almost no one will read it. But what it's grown in me and what it represents as a hope is something that, in me physically staying alive, it may increase for weeks or months somehow the likelihood that others will read and take to heart. Until about a week ago, it was 95 characteristics of the insanely humane, effective warriors throughout history, nonviolent warriors. Now it's 105. And number 100 is no nonviolent army, no hope. These are essays that simply organically unfolded within me. That number 100 has taken particular prominence in my mind. Central to this death fast is the notion that when 1,000 people are seen dying in front of the Canadian Embassy, global warming will stop, and it will not stop before. Well, that's an army of 1,000. But more centrally, it's the idea of an army. And I've come to the view, and it's been suggested to me, but tragically, I seem to have to figure everything out for myself. I listen deeply, but I still have to figure everything out for myself. I seem to be today's Sergeant Foley from An Officer and a Gentleman. I hate this. I wish there were 10,000 that I saw Sergeant Foley equivalents, but I don't. It was clear on one of my prior two hunger strikes, 50 days in front of the White House. This notion that everything depended upon an army, the notion of Inchi warrior, occurred to me at that point in time. And it's come back into the fore in my mind that all hope, whatever tiny hope there is for humanity, depends upon that emergence of an army of insanely humane, nonviolent warriors. And me returning to death fast at this moment is not the best way for me to do that. Now, there was a moment when ObiWan Kenobi surrendering to Darth Vader's lightsaber blow was the time for him to physically exit so that spiritually he would take a greater prominence than ever before. That's the same decision that Jesus made. That's the same decision that I want to make. But having said that, none of the three made the decision per se. They recognized the conditions, they recognized the situation, they recognized the opportunity that existed largely outside of their control with respect to its very nature, with respect to its timing. They didn't create all the circumstances, but they recognized when it was time, and they recognized when it wasn't time. This death fast has changed things. It's changed me. It's changed people around me. It's opened avenues of at least visible communication. Start Loving is on the mind of people that didn't know he existed 3 months ago. That was totally unforeseen by me, but there it is. So instead of resuming death fast on July 4th, Independence Day, I suspect I will not do that. The other thing that's come clear in my mind, or clearer, has returned to clarity because, again, on one of the prior two hunger strikes, it had achieved a clarity in me. That there are different ways of dying for a cause, whether that cause is whether that cause is new countertops, a date with that girl, keeping one's job, liberating India, gaining civil rights, averting environmental Armageddon. Nothing significant happens unless one is dying for the cause. But there are different ways. And oh, what a slippery slope. How easy it is to create deceptions for ourselves. How near impossible it's been for 40 years for so-called activists to escape the delusion. Not 1 in 100,000 of them have been dying for a cause, and the only people that are fooled are themselves and their co-delusionists, the other activists. All evidence is that they're not dying for a cause because people don't respond as though they are. But Teresa of Calcutta, over how many decades, was clearly dying for the cause of the destitute in Calcutta. Stephen Biko in South African struggle against apartheid was clearly dying for a cause months and years before he was captured by the South African police thugs and beaten to death. Such a slippery slope. Those that attempt to die other than physically for a cause, of that small population, not 1 in a million avoids deceiving themselves, has their pulse continued to beat, but escapes the temptations at self-delusion. I was admonished recently to take the Buddhist middle way. It was well intended, but what hogwash. However, there could be a correct middle way. And for Jesus to survive as long as he did was the correct middle way. For Obi-Wan to fight as long as he did was the correct middle way. For Loving to fight as long as he has, and to fight with a pulse a bit longer, appears to be the correct middle way.